Today we're going to take a look at the brand new Sheeran Looper Plus, a beginner entry-level loop station that's probably one of the best available right now in the current market. It's got some impressive features that makes it very attractive for both new loopers, but also people who are intermediate going on to advanced, as it is very simple to operate. We'll go ahead and compare it in this video to other loop stations available in the price point, specifically the Boss RC500, to help you decide which loop station is best suited for you. First, let's establish a basic overview of these two loop stations when it comes to actually operating them straight out of the box. So on the left, I've got the Boss RC500, which is probably the biggest competitor or comparison pedal to this new Ed Sheeran Looper Plus. Now, as you can see on both these stations, they're roughly the same form factor in terms of actual real estate that they occupy surface area-wise on a pedal board, on the floor. I don't really think that's too much of a major area to really compare. But I actually think there's quite a lot of difference in terms of the workflow on the two loop pedals, and depending on almost how competent you are, or even to the degree of complexity you want to sort of comprehend while you're actually playing on the looper station, will differ greatly as to which one you will lean towards wanting to use. Now, I personally think the Ed Sheeran loop station's the easiest and also most comfortable one to use because of these incredible foot switches. These new foot switches they've added on these, basically these loops, head rush looper boards, are so much better than the old small little foot switches that you see on traditional guitar pedals. Now, the Boss RC500 has got a much more like guitar effects pedal style approach with its foot switches, which are quite small, and it's not the fact that you can't hit them accurately, it's just obviously the chances of missing it's much higher because it's smaller, whereas these are dead chunky, and I feel like you can really slam on them, and every single time it activates the record process and stops the record process. Like, no matter how hard you press it, whether you tap it, whether you slam on it, it's going to be able to withstand that. I also feel like the press and hold commands are just a little bit easier too, because you can hold it much more competently. So you've got the Boss RC500. Obviously, the key difference is it has 3 foot switches compared to 2 on the head on the Ed Sheeran Looper board. I keep calling it Head Rush Looper board because obviously Head Rush make these pedals. It's just rebranded as Sheeran Loopers. So obviously on a Boss RC500, you've got your record, play, foot switch straight out of the box. You then have your stop foot switch, then you press and hold this to obviously clear your track. Then also you have track select that lets you easily switch between track 1 and then also track 2, which you can see shown by these little indicator lights here. This is flashing. We're on track 2 now. Select that. It'll go back to track 1. Now, that workflow is very easy for dual track looping, switching between basically essentially the 2 different work areas on your loop pedal without any too much drama. You don't have to press and hold things, you don't accidentally clear stuff. Super simple. With the head rush, with the Sheeran Looper, head rush looper, with the Ed Sheeran loop pedal, this is, I think, a little bit more complex when it comes to trying to switch between the tracks. So when you're trying to switch between the tracks with this loop station, you have to press and hold each of the foot switches, which will go ahead and switch between those tracks. But which foot switch you hold depends greatly on which track is currently selected. So 1 minute you might hold the second pedal to switch to the other track, and then if you hold that, it will clear it. So I'll explain this in a minute, but first I'll just actually show you how the loop pedal works straight out of the box. So straight out of the box, the Boss RC500 is a dual track loop station. So this is obvious, you've got 2 tracks, they all are the same length and they work perfectly fine. Whereas the Sheeran Plus actually comes as a single track loop pedal straight out of the box. So this is very comparable to Ed Sheeran's You Need Me, I Don't Need You performance back on SBT TV, where he performed with the Boss RC, I think it was the Boss RC20 XL or whatever they were called back then, which was just a Boss loop station that was single track. So this is exactly how the Sheeran Plus looper operates straight out of the box, which makes it perfect for a beginner. And then from there, you can switch out the play modes and make it much more appropriate to how complex you actually want to loop with 2 different tracks. So on a single track loop pedal, obviously we just go ahead and lay down your first loop. So you go ahead and you have your first track just laid down dead easy. And then on a single looper pedal, you can then just go ahead and overdub on top of it. So you can have unlimited overdubs, do whatever you like. You could do like a harmony, a drum beat, and then you could phase that in and out. But if you just wanted to use this for some guitar practice, so you could just go ahead and obviously simply practice your guitar licks, come up with some solos. But if you wanted to obviously build out a loop, this is very, very easy to do. So we can go ahead and lay down a single loop track. And then we can start overdubbing. Then we could do a little harmony. Got our little harmony riff there. You can obviously build it out further. Then we can go ahead and add a drum beat to this. Then got our drum beat, and you could do your singing, your looping, whatever you want to do over this. But then using the overdub feature by pressing and holding the record foot switch for a couple of seconds, we can remove the drum beat with an undo, then we can bring it back in with a redo. So that allows us to leverage a single track loop station, but also use it as a little bit of a additional second track when you're operating within that single mode. So that's straight out of the box how the Sheeran Plus Looper operates. It's in single mode only, which is one loop track, but you can obviously do infinite overdubs on top of that you can undo and redo to basically reintroduce different layers. Now, obviously these aren't the only performance modes you can run both of these loop stations in. I break down in detail inside of my online courses exactly how you can set these different modes up on both the Boss RC500 and also the Sheeran Plus Looper. I've got ultimate guides that take you through literally every single setting on these pedals, so it makes it super easy, so you don't need to read the crappy little manual that you get on the websites. So you've got some proper tutorial videos to follow along with those, because especially on the Boss RC500, there's some quite custom performance modes that you can do on there, where obviously you've got your obvious like dual track looper mode, single track looper mode, A/B track looping, where you can have like song-based, section-based looping. But there's some other cool stuff you can do to take it even further by leveraging some of the quite advanced track settings and obviously loop sync modes that pedal has. But also the Sheeran Plus has got a plethora of different performance modes that are available within the menu. So you literally just press and hold the encoder for a couple of seconds, and this will boot up the main menu. And then you can scroll over to modes, and just with literally a turn and press of a dial, it will switch the looper station into dual track mode, section-based looping, single mode, and also probably my favorite feature is sync. Now inside of sync mode, this allows you to have two different loop tracks sync together, but they can be completely different lengths, which means building up a loop is much faster on stage. Now the Boss RC500 can do this, but you kind of have to predetermine the loop lengths that you want to perform at. So this is going to be, track 1's going to be 2 measures, and then track 2 is going to be 8 measures. So you have to predetermine it within a preset. You can do it a little bit in freeform looping on the RC500, but the quantization and syncing on the Boss RC500 can sometimes sound a little bit robotic when you are freeform looping like that with multiple different length loops. Something about it just doesn't quite feel or sound right when you're performing with it. Whereas with the Sheeran Plus Looper, from all of my testing over the last couple of weeks, I've found it works very well. So you don't need to loop to a metronome, you don't need any of that crap. You can just literally perform with the pedal how you'd want to. So for example, I could just go ahead and lay down a drum beat. So I laid that down in literally less than like 2 seconds, and it was sort of done. Now this mode is also where I'm going to be able to show you some of the problems when it comes to switching between tracks. So obviously on the Boss RC500, we can click track select to switch over to track 2 without disturbing track 1. Whereas here, if I want to switch over to another track, I have to double tap one of the foot switches. But obviously if I double tap this foot switch, it's going to stop the other loop track, and then vice versa. If I go ahead and double tap that, it'll switch me back to that track. But then if I then double tap this, it'll switch me over to track 2. It's super confusing. Like, you can basically double tap either foot switch A or foot switch B to switch tracks. But obviously when you're performing or new to the pedal, you don't really know which foot switch to press. You just assume you're going to press that one because that one is free, but then that'll stop your other loop. And then you go ahead and try and double tap the other one to switch back to loop A, and then it records a loop that's too short on the other pedal, which is now super annoying. So I found it took ages, and I still struggle with it, knowing which foot switch to double tap and which one not to. So for example, we've got this playing away here. If I double tap the stop foot switch, which you would assume would just switch you over to another track, it's going to stop track A. But I've got the secondary option to play this track and double tap foot switch A to switch over to track B. But obviously it's then going to initiate a super quick overdub, as you just saw there. It went and did a little overdub and then switched over. So if you were singing or doing something, that might then get picked up in your loop. Now obviously the solution to this problem is connecting an external Footswitch. So you can connect external Footswitches to the rear of this loop station, which is fantastic. The same as well on the Boss RC500, you can do that, and you can assign pretty much whatever you like, either to an external MIDI Footswitch pedal or an external like Boss FS7, FS6 style Footswitch that just runs off of battery and is much easier to set up than worrying about MIDI CC commands and different things like that. But again, I show you how to set all of that up. Link down below in the video description if you want full, in detailed, nice, slow-paced tutorials. Because the thing is, on YouTube, there's only so much information I can contain within a single video that people are actually going to watch. And then as well, that we have to go at a much faster pace on YouTube for watch retention and obviously keeping the video so it's not like 3 hours long. So if you want those more in-depth guide videos, they're all available on my website for a huge range of Boss loop stations, pretty much every single Boss loop station ever made, and also all of the Headrush looper pedals and the new Ed Sheeran looper boards too. So now that I've sort of shown you a little bit of a problem when it comes to switching between the tracks with a default setup here, let's go back to explaining how this multi-mode and sync mode actually operates. So we have track 1, right? Right, see again, I messed up already with the bloody switching of the Footswitches. Let's try that again. Track A, playing away. I'm gonna have to double tap this Footswitch to switch over to track B. So now we've got this drum beat that's super short, that was about maybe 2 bars long. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's literally maybe even 1 measure. I can now go ahead and let's come up with some chords. So I can now lay down as long as loop as I'd like here. 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So you've seen there, I recorded some guitar chords that were almost double or twice the length of what that drum loop actually is. I think this is a 4-bar loop off the top of my head versus that like 1 measure that we created. And you can see how much quicker you could build a song up live on stage. Now we could get into maybe even do an overdub. So we're now building things up. We could be singing, be talking to the crowd, and stuff is just so much faster that we could go ahead and switch over to our other track if we wanted to add some more rhythm or percussion. 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we now laid that nice little hi-hat down on our other shorter loop, and you can see they're both working together in tandem without any problems at all. They're not going out of phase, not going out of sync, because this pedal's super intelligent, actually quantizing these loops very, very well without you having to worry about that. And also you hear there's no weird robotic stuff going on with the quantization. It sounds perfect, whereas this loop station, the RC500, really struggles with operating in these modes, even though it can do it. Just something about it that doesn't feel or sound right when you're trying to leverage this feature, essentially. Now let's talk about a couple of things that I don't really like too much about the Sheeran Plus looper station. Now the Boss RC500, when you look at it physically, it has much more buttons on the front of the loop station, which could be a good or bad thing depending on the style that you like. But I actually think it's a good thing because it gives you access to much more advanced settings. So you've got track edit buttons for both track 1 and track 2. You literally press these or hold them down for a couple of seconds and you can jump into individual track parameters. Now inside of these track settings, you can alter things like sync modes, rhythm sync, tempo sync, quantization, measures, and you can really build and flush out predetermined presets to a much more intentional, almost performance of particular tracks and songs within your set. Now you don't really have that on the Sheeran Plus loop station. You just really have the master menu that you just use that encoder to explore between, and everything's organized into categories, and then that's sort of where it ends. I don't feel like you can customize the presets to the same degree or extent. Same as well with the Boss RC500. This also has a built-in rhythm section. So it has a built-in drum machine, essentially. You can either have that as a counting or a metronome, but you can also obviously have it as different styles of drums like rock grooves, soul grooves, R&B grooves, blues grooves. This makes it fun for using the RC500 almost as a backing track for practicing your guitar or even just songwriting very easily. Especially on the Boss RC500 and the newer generations of Boss loop pedals, you can dive into these drum machines and customize them directly on the pedal very easily, whether that be disabling things like the snare hits, the hi-hat hits, the drum pattern on the kick. You can sort of change between different variations with the built-in sounds, which gives it a lot more versatility. And furthermore to this, you can even jump into the Boss software studio where you can build out your own rhythm converters and put MIDI essentially straight into the loop station, have custom drum grooves for your particular songs that you want. So that's good for somebody that wants to leverage that. I think for 90% of people buying these pedals and that are performing on stage in a style of Ed Sheeran, they don't really need a built-in rhythm machine. I used to always have to turn it off on all of my Boss loop stations personally, unless I was looping with a metronome. Especially on these smaller pedals, I would always have to disable it and make sure it was turned down and didn't accidentally trigger. So for somebody who's just performing in a pub or club, or it's their first ever loop pedal and they want to use it for actually proper live looping, not, you know, a little bit of fake looping, then obviously the Sheeran Plus is probably the better pedal because it doesn't have the rhythm section to worry about. Now further to this, you've got the rhythm section, but also you've got built-in effects on the Boss RC500. The Looper Plus, sorry, doesn't have any built-in effects, only the multiply one, the big boy, the £1,000 really expensive one, which is essentially the Headrush Looper Board 2.0. That has all of the effects, all of the rigs, all of the things you would want, even like guitar amplifiers. Insane unit. I'll do a video on that next, so make sure you subscribe. I'm still waiting for that one to arrive here in the studio, so be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that when we drop it, because that pedal is probably the best loop station in the world right now. I have loads of experience with the Headrush Looper Board, and this just fixes all of the problems with the Headrush Looper Board and obviously refreshes it and improves it with these newer Footswitches. So I'm super excited to check that out. I personally think it's probably going to be the better pedal than even something like the Boss RC600. Anyways, back onto the baby brother, which is the Looper Plus. This doesn't have obviously a built-in rhythm section or any built-in track effects. You can still connect things like your microphones and stuff straight into it, but it's just a very simple loop station. Now, another key difference, which I think is probably the most important one when it comes to the usability of the pedals, and that is the track faders. So on the RC500, you can see here, we've got two faders for controlling the volume of track 1 and also track 2. I often find when I perform live, I love this on the Boss RC300 and also the Boss RC500s and also the 505s, but these pedals in particular, how easy it is to just jump down on the floor and adjust the track volume, turning it down a little bit, especially when you're performing live in venues that you don't really know the acoustics of the room too well. When you're laying down your loops, just sometimes a guitar chord progression can just be like 3 times louder than you thought it was going to be when it comes through the loop station, which then means when you do your guitar solo or you're looping other elements, they just get lost a little bit in the massive noise. So if you have that flexibility to just jump down and quickly turn it down, you then have headroom for you to perform on top of the loop performance, which is very important. Whereas with the Looper Plus, the Sheeran pedal, you don't have individual control of the track volumes. You can't really turn this encoder to do anything. You can set up fades where if you press this encoder, it'll mute, and also it'll do like fade ins and fade outs, which is kind of useful, but you obviously have to set that up in retrospect. And also it's not the easiest because again, you got to make sure you're on the right track to mute the alternative track. Just more stuff to kind of worry about. And also, you know, you can obviously press this with your foot, but you kind of need to lunge down in order to mute your tracks, which isn't ideal. Now to the side of this, you do have some volume dials, but this is for your instrument input, your microphone input, and your master output. So obviously you go ahead and that just turns everything down. So you don't really have much control over the volume of the pedal in that moment where you would potentially need to reduce it. Now, of course, you could potentially set up some external foot switches that maybe turn stuff down that you can press and trigger for muting and, you know, decreasing volume, but it's just something extra that you then have to take with you in your backpack when the whole premise of this pedal is meant to be ease of transport and ease of setup. Set it up wherever you like, don't need to worry too much. On the topic of taking your loop station wherever you like and performing in literally the middle of nowhere, whether that be on a boat, a field, at some random wedding where they want you to play in some awkward location, thankfully both of these pedals are battery operated, which is brilliant. So the Boss RC500 obviously runs off battery just like its predecessor, the Boss RC30 did, so dead easy to set that up. But thankfully the Sheeran Looper Station also runs straight off of battery, so you can just throw those straight into the back of the pedal, and you can also take that wherever you may require to do your performance. You can then obviously combine both these pedals with a portable speaker, whether that be something like a Boss Cube, them new Boss Cube things that run off battery too. They have built-in effects, reverb, and for the most part they sound pretty good for what they're doing. You know, at the end of the day, they are running off of battery and they're a portable speaker, so they do the job. You know, they're probably some of the best options in the market really in terms of weight and also volume that they can output. So if you are playing things like weddings outside, or you're interested in busking, you can obviously use your battery power on all of these different devices. Next, let's talk about some advanced elements that both of these loop stations can and also can't do. Now, this is something if you are a beginner looper, obviously you probably are, it's probably the first loop stations you're ever sort of considering buying. These are some areas that you may not fully understand or grasp exactly what it means. Now, first thing I want to talk about is the USB capabilities. So the Sheeran Plus loop station can be a built-in audio interface. So literally connecting a USB cable to the back of this loop pedal and throwing it into your Mac, like behind me here, you can use this as an input and output device for recording straight into GarageBand, Logic, whatever music production software you want to go ahead and actually use. Now, audio interfaces inherently are pretty expensive, like $200-300 for a half decent audio interface. So the fact that you can utilize the high quality inputs on the Sheeran Plus looper, throw that straight into your DAW is great for either recording and songwriting itself, just using it as an input and output device, or actually capturing your performances. So right now, I currently have my guitar plugged into this loop station, and then I have the output of this loop station ran into my master mixing setup behind me here in my actual studio. But what I could have actually done was I could have just literally plugged my guitar in and then ran a huge USB cable straight into my PC and just captured it essentially the same way. And that would have been much easier to actually set up. It's just I don't have a cable that long because I'm at the other side of the room. So we did it this way instead. Now, unfortunately, the Boss RC500 doesn't have any form of audio interface capabilities. It does have USB functionality, so you can plug it into the computer and literally transfer files off and on and off the device, whether that be audio files, importing audio files, rhythm converter software with the Boss, but it doesn't have any audio interface options. So you can't use this for inputting or outputting audio into a PC or Mac, which is kind of crap. I'm not gonna lie, I think it's a huge miss on this pedal. Now, something that both of these pedals do have on a positive note is MIDI integration. So on older devices, you would have a big, huge 5-pin MIDI connection, which meant you would need a big, fat, chunky cable to plug into this. Whereas on more recent devices in sort of the last 4 or 5 years, we've started to see this aux cord style connector. It's literally like an aux cable that is now transferring the MIDI information. Now, thankfully, the Headrush Looper, the Looper Plus Sheeran pedal, thankfully that comes with an adapter in the box that lets you convert a traditional MIDI cable into a mini MIDI connection that you can throw straight into the back of this pedal, which I think is great because proprietary cables that have this normal MIDI connection to small MIDI connection are incredibly expensive. And Boss obviously are the main manufacturer of these cables, and they're super short. They're like a couple of meters long and they're like 20-30 quid. They're really expensive. And unfortunately, the Boss RC500 doesn't come with any form of adapter for the MIDI cables. So that means you have to go and buy Boss's proprietary connections, which are like 20 quid on top of this in order to use any form of MIDI with the RC500. Boss make the best MIDI cables that actually work for these pedals from all of my testing. So they're the ones I personally use without any huge issues. But thankfully, the Sheeran Looper Plus comes with an adapter inside of the box, which then means you can pick up like a 2-3 pounds cable, a normal old-fashioned MIDI cable, dead cheap off of Amazon, and just throw it straight into that adapter and it will work without any problems whatsoever. So it just keeps the cost of almost afterlife and ownership of this pedal much less, and also you can get a much larger MIDI cable if you wanted to, one that's longer than literally like 1.5 meters, like them Boss ones are so tiny, mate. Now, if you don't know what MIDI is, this is essentially a protocol and language that allows your musical devices to talk to one another. So MIDI allows you to connect multiple different units, whether that be multi-effects units, keyboards, drum machines, music production software, looper stations. You can connect multiple products together via MIDI and they'll all communicate almost via their internal brains. So MIDI can then sync all of these pedals together. So you could have multiple loop stations connected via MIDI and they all run off of the same tempo, the same MIDI clock data, the same tempo information. So that means you record a loop on one pedal and then those loops will be in sync with a completely alternate pedal via MIDI because they can transmit that information. But also, probably the most useful feature is being able to connect external foot switches. So of course you can connect one external foot switch to these loop stations, just like a little simple Boss FS6, Boss FS7. But with the Sheeran Plus looper and also the RC500, sorry, you can go ahead and connect external MIDI foot controllers and have way more external pedals and also custom commands that you can trigger without having to press and hold things. The biggest issue with all of these small loop pedals is the amount of tap dancing you have to do. You have to press and hold this, press and hold that. Oh, I accidentally triggered this. I'll press this and then hold that at the same time to do this. It's very difficult to navigate, especially on more complex projects and performances and compositions. Whereas with an external MIDI foot controller, you can map different things like mute this track, stop this track, start this track, turn this track down, fade this track in, fade it out. turning these effects on, turn these effects off, especially from the RC500. Loads of stuff that you can do, and it isn't as difficult as it sounds to set up. Once you understand what a MIDI CC number is and how you assign that to a MIDI CC command, you can sort of start to understand how you can basically translate these messages into a program assign to do something to make your life easier. Again, we talk about all of this in great detail inside of my ultimate guides for both the Boss RC500 and also the Sheeran Plus Looper Station and any other Boss loop pedal you can possibly think of. All of those are linked down below over on my main website if you want to check those out. It will help save you loads of stress and hours of wasted time trying to figure this out on your own, and also help you get the most out of your recent purchases and truly enjoy the capabilities of what these products can actually do. In conclusion, I think the Sheeran Looper Plus is an awesome option for an entry-level to intermediate loop station. I think it has everything that you would want, but my favorite feature are the ease of use that the loop station has. It reduces all of the barrier to entries that you may get with more complex Boss RC505, Boss RC600, etc. But even the Boss RC500, to access some of those advanced features on that loop station, you do have to have some form of knowledge of MIDI or menu systems with the Boss ecosystem to really set those up correctly. And the Looper Plus by Ed Sheeran just has speed at its forefront. You can switch between the loop modes as a click of a button. You can switch and create presets, click of a button. It just has one dead simple, easy to use menu system, which I just think that makes it very capable. I also love the fact it has the audio interface capabilities. This just adds a little bit extra value for money, that you can hook this up to a PC and use it with your DAW for either capturing your performances or just sketching out some ideas or songwriting with it. And its build quality feels absolutely fantastic, both from the Footswitches and also the encasement that the whole loop station it resides within. You can really see where your sort of £299 has gone on this piece of equipment, and it feels much more substantial compared to the Boss RC500. Don't forget, I do have ultimate guides for each of these products linked down below in the video description. This will take you through every single setting found on these loop stations to help you get the most out of your latest purchase. So whichever pedal you use, you'll understand how to set it up properly, all of the features it can actually do, and also push it to the limit to truly get the most out of your new loop station. But as always, I've been Ben Rowlands. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And if you're still undecided about which is the best loop station for you, you should check out this video next.